Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. You're watching Daily Debrief on what has been a quite dramatic end to the week. Helping us make sense of some of that are Prashant and Abdul today. First up, we're talking about Italy, where the Prime Minister Mario Draghi, a banker who's been heading a unity government for the past 17 months, has resigned, only to have the country's president then reject the resignation and ask him to address Parliament and explain the political scenario first. This is he is likely to do on Wednesday next week. In the meantime, markets slipped, the euro slipped below the dollar, and headlines screamed crisis. All this while, Italians are heading to the beach for summer. Prashant is here to unravel that Italian political scenario for us. Prashant, elections are scheduled for next year anyway. Is Draghi using the optics of this scenario to kind of put the blame for this so-called crisis entirely on Conte and the sort of five-star movement?
Right. So it's important to note, of course, that five-star movement is one of the supporters of the Draghi government. In fact, like you said, it is supported by a complete cross-section of the Italian political spectrum, ranging from the centrists or the so-called centre-left parties, the PD, to the extreme right. So all of them have been supporting Draghi. It's like you said, it's a unity government. And the five-star movement was once a much more powerful force in Italian politics. Now it has lost quite a bit of its influence. So on the one hand, there is the five-star movement sort of jockeying for an advantage ahead of the 2023 elections, trying to sort of, and a lot of this has to do with the stimulus package that was being passed. So the party saying that this is not enough, etc., raising objections. So trying to use this moment to also sort of shore up whatever advantage it has, try to seek to consolidate its support. On the other hand, Draghi also playing a political game in the sense that by putting all the blame, for instance, he did win the confidence vote. There was a confidence vote also that took place on Thursday. He did win the confidence vote, but nonetheless he resigned. So it's also an act of one-upmanship on his part to sort of, put all the blame on the five-star movement and, not let them have the upper hand they were trying to seek. So this, in one sense, is a bit of an internal political game, so to speak, and it is, I think, some of the sections on the left have pointed out that this is basically a crisis of the ruling establishment more than anything else. It's more of an intra-establishment conflict that we're seeing here, various sections of the ruling class sort of trying to, push and pull each other, and that is what is more of what we're seeing. So, I mean, it really depends on what happens next week. It does look like Draghi, nonetheless, has the numbers to continue if he wishes to continue. But he is sort of, I think he's taking his position as a unity candidate, as someone above the fray, as someone taking a high moral position, so to speak, and doing all the, and these are of course all usual political games in the scenario. So he's using those techniques to sort of score a point at this point of time. Also important to remember that Draghi himself is not a politician per se in that sense. He was appointed by the president at a time of political crisis because of the massive crisis. He's a banker, and we know what a banker means.
And a banker with all that heritage with the World Bank and the European Bank.
Exactly. And he's followed those policies of the international agencies or the Western agencies to the T, much to the consternation. Not consternation, I would say, it caused a great deal of crisis. We'll talk about that to the common Italian people, to the working class, etc. So. This is a bit of a curious political crisis in the sense that you have a government which actually has not lost power, nonetheless teetering on the verge of a crisis in all of its constituents. For instance, you have the right-wing sections which are eagerly calling for an election because they see that they might benefit at this point of time. We have, for instance, whereas on the other hand, the centrist or centre-left PD that is there, one of the major parties, is a bit more uncertain on whether it wants to face immediate elections right now. The left, of course, has been calling for has been very clear in its position. It has said that it has from the very beginning been very critical of the Draghi government, of the arrangement that has actually held the Draghi government together, and it has condemned that it has also called for a much better resolution to this situation. So all in all, in interesting times across Europe, we've seen the Bulgarian government fall, we've seen Boris Johnson fall, now we see Mario Draghi as well. Whether he falls or not is a different question, but a lot of chaos taking place in Europe. We have mass protests as well, all this happening during a massive cost of living crisis. In fact, that was one of the issues that came up during this debate also. So all this, keeping in mind, interesting moment for Italy, of course. Need to see what happens in the next couple of days.
All right. So Draghi, like you were mentioning, is not a politician, and before him, Conte wasn't really either. How has he done as Prime Minister at a difficult time coming out of COVID and all.
Right. So, incidentally, last year, towards the end of last year, the Economist magazine declared Italy to be their country of the year, and this is widely hailed and all that. Whereas, if you look at the left, for instance, we carried an article from one of our friends from Potere del Popolo on that. They actually pointed out a series of reasons why this is not the case, and many of these reasons have only escalated this year. For instance, they pointed out at that point of time that Italy was the only OECD country where wages hadn't risen in the last 30 years. And in this year, we have seen a wide variety of strikes by working people. We have seen migrant workers, for instance, continuously protest in the way in which they're treated, the fact that there is no regularization of work. We have seen students take to the streets in large numbers, especially after workplace accidents.
Yeah.
Italy has a horrible rate of workplace accidents because of the withdrawal of safety, regulations, because of the fact that students are required to sort of do an internship, apprenticeship actually after school. The fact is that educational opportunities for students have drastically declined because of lack of government spending, austerity policies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So there is a massive crisis of unemployment among the youth that is there. So when these accidents take place, students have time, and I think at least 2 or 3 such incidents have taken place. And students have taken to the streets time and again. Trade unions have been very vociferous, many of them unhappy at the wholehearted support Italy has been extending to the EU and to the NATO in the Ukraine war. For instance, recently there was a major protest about increasing militarization of the Pisa region. So all these together, I think the Draghi government has only escalated these policies which are actually much more unfriendly to the people. And it's also to be noted that Italy suffered massively during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Again, a result of decades of policies which basically wrecked the health sector. So while the government did claim credit for increased vaccination rates, the fact remained that the number of deaths and many other statistics were incredibly high because of the systematic downgrading of these services. So when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to public transport, when it comes to a lot of public utilities, when it comes to opportunities for the youth, when it comes to the rights of workers, in all these areas, Italy is lagging. Italy is considering that it's a European country, one of the countries of the European Union, for instance, which is supposed to be, living standards are supposed to be much better, supposedly rights are supposed to be much better, so to speak. But despite all that, we've seen massive protests on all these fronts by people, and that really is a major indictment of the Draghi government. Now, the important thing to note is that all this has happened even as the entire traditional political spectrum, from the center to the extreme right, have all supported the Draghi government. So all of them, are involved in this, which actually goes to show the difference. Even so-called anti-systemic parties, which is what the Five-Star Movement was, supposedly an anti-systemic party, even they were completely complicit in these kind of policies. So I don't think there is a vast deal of popularity for Mario Draghi or his government, in the sense that they have just accelerated and continued those policies which have caused a huge amount of harm to the people. But that is to be expected considering his background, which is what the point is. Absolutely. Because there is no real effort on either part of any of these governments, whether it be Boris Johnson, whether it be Draghi, whether it be Emmanuel Macron and Elizabeth Borne in France, to really sort of change the axis on which policies are developed and policies are implemented. So in that sense, there is no surprise at all that Draghi has followed that path, and no surprise also that there is so much discontent against him.
Right. Good we have you in the studio, because you will also have to brief us on the next story, which is a developing one from Sri Lanka. In a remarkable turn of events, Ranil Wickremesinghe, the man whose resignation was a key demand of the mass protests currently underway in Sri Lanka, has been sworn in as acting president. As you might know, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has fled to Singapore and resigned the office. Sri Lanka's parliament will likely take a vote on whether to make this permanent in about a week. Prashant, what exactly is going on in Sri Lanka at the moment?
Right. I mean, I think we talked about Sri Lanka a couple of times in previous episodes, and each time we said that by the time this show comes out, things again might have changed. Who knows? But yes, the key development here, of course, being the fact that Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the president, has resigned officially. The mail came yesterday. There were legal formalities. So formally today counts as the date of his resignation. Right. Chaotic past couple of days. For instance, he fled Sri Lanka to Maldives and then subsequently to Singapore. And this was before resigning. The belief is that he did this so that he would retain his immunity before he wanted to retain his immunity and flee before resigning, so that he would not get arrested or something. And we also know that an earlier attempt by him to flee had been blocked because of immigration officers. His brother also fled, Basil Rajapaksa, who again was blocked earlier. The oldest brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, the former president, remains. And I think the latest, there have been directions that he not be allowed to flee. But all this together sort of, marking a very considerable rejection of the Rajapaksa legacy. It's remarkable that someone who was in such a strong position in 2019 is today, within just a matter of 2 or 3 years, has become one of the most unpopular people in the country, has been forced to flee, was made multiple attempts to flee and then was finally able to. He's that unpopular. Yeah. So this actually looks like it marks an end. But important to note that the power of the Rajapaksas is not completely waned. They're not in a position to be public figures, at least in the near future. But their influence, their financial muscle, for instance, possibly remains. That will still play a role in the coming days and weeks as well. So, interesting moment definitely for Sri Lanka, because we saw that, if you remember, in 2009, the Sri Lankan, after very brutal suppression and oppression and civil war, the Rajapaksas seemed dominant, and within a few years they had become so unpopular they were thrown out. They again came back in 2000 in the next election, and again it seemed that their star was on the ascendant, nothing could stop them. And now within a few years again, so the cycle of Sri Lankan politics has been quite interesting that way. And what this means for that political movement, for their political party, remains to be seen. I think they'll adapt, try to find people who are, say, supportive of their agenda, who will not punish them too much. So right now, a lot of them seem to be backing Ranil Wickremesinghe, like you said, who is now the acting president of the country. So next few days, I think the presidential election is scheduled for the 20th, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And so next few days are going to see some intense lobbying and jockeying for power among all the various candidates who are there. And the influence and the supporters of the Rajapaksas will be vital in determining that. So definitely the end of a chapter, no doubts about that. But it's not the end of their complete political influence or the sway they have over, because these are things that are built over years, built over decades. Right. So it's not easy to just dismantle all of that. In fact, the current speaker is supposed to be, who's basically presiding over the proceedings, is supposed to be a close associate to the Rajapaksas also. So all these factors will definitely...
They have also majority in parliament as
exactly,
well.
Their party has a majority in parliament as well. So all these factors are likely to play a decisive role.
All right. So going beyond this sort of relationship between the country and this Rajapaksa family, whoever does come in faces a continuingly worsening economic situation. What are sort of the people who have taken to the streets, as well as other stakeholders, parties demanding?
Right. So it's a bit divided right now, because we have Ranil Wickremesinghe, who's the acting president. He's definitely thrown his hat in to become the president as well. Now he's very, very, very unpopular because everyone, the protesters on the street, see him as basically an agent or an ally of the Rajapaksas. Now, it's important to remember that Ranil Wickremesinghe becomes the president a few months ago, and Prime Minister, a few months ago, and he was the only member of his party when he was appointed Prime Minister. So that is the extent of legitimacy he has. And he didn't even win the election. He was appointed as part of a proportional representation system. So that is the legitimacy he has. So there is absolutely no love for Ranil Wickremesinghe on the streets. And I think since becoming Prime Minister, the fact that they barely managed to do anything at all has compounded the situation for him. It's interesting that after he took over as acting president, his immediate announcements were that he would no longer be called His Excellency, abolish the President's flag, which I think also goes to show that he's like really straining every nerve possible to kind of say that I'm not that kind of president. So, and that he's really worried also in some senses about the protesters. Now, the protesters themselves have withdrawn from locations like the President's residence and office, the Prime Minister's office, etc., which they had occupied for a considerable number of days. But they made it very clear that they intend to continue struggling until Ranil Wickremesinghe is also removed. So he's definitely one candidate. The belief is that a lot of sections of the Rajapaksa party are supporting him. There is Sajith Premadasa, who is the main opposition leader, who incidentally who broke away from Ranil Wickremesinghe a few years ago and then formed his own party. He is the other candidate now. Whether he will gain enough support to be a president is a big question. That remains to be seen. There is also a third candidate from the Rajapaksa party himself, who's emerging as some kind of a dark horse, some sections supporting him. So right now we have three major candidates for president. Now, then, like I said, the next few days will determine all of this. But like we've discussed before, whoever comes to power is going to have a gargantuan task ahead of them because there is no easy solution. I think economists on the left, people, all economists have always warned that this is going to be a long haul. This crisis is no easy solution. It will require a government which can take bold measures, which can be honest with the people, which tries to sort of tell people that which tries to give people a plan and tell them that this is what we are trying to do, this is what we have to do together, and have that kind of a conversation with the people, which this current political establishment has completely failed. And their solution is only, the current political establishment's only solution has been to go to the IMF. Now the IMF itself is likely to be a bit wary because of the political crisis. They'll hesitate now, but now they'll probably put even more conditions before giving a loan.
Extending more credit.
And when a loan comes, it will come with a huge amount of conditions which will worsen life for the people. So it's a very vicious cycle as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. There are maybe ways to break out of it which are slightly medium to long term, but they will require a drastic reorientation of policies, and that will probably not make the IMF and others happy. So it's a difficult ball game for anyone who comes to power in Sri Lanka. I don't envy anybody who has to take up this responsibility. So right now remains to be seen, whether anybody can really step up to the job and be able to convince the people on the streets that we are trying. I think that's really where we are right now.
All right. Thanks very much, Prashant. We'll, of course, keep tracking developments as they happen. Saudi Arabia today, that's Friday, opened its airspace to all air carriers, which effectively signals the end to its long-standing ban on Israeli flights, both overflying as well as landing in its territory. A key step, of course, towards normalization of ties between the two countries, which is a key purpose of US President Joe Biden's visit to the region. Biden is the first president who will fly directly from Israel, where he was on an official visit, to Saudi Arabia for this next leg of his West Asia tour. So as far as the main agenda of this visit is concerned, there's no real secret. We've talked about it often enough on Daily Debrief as well. And Abdul joins us for more, perhaps reiteration of some of those key points, Abdul. But just in terms of, since we have been clear on what this trip is all meant for, how successful has Biden been in that context?
I think this will be too early to talk about success. But yeah, there is a decisive step towards normalization, which is quite obvious. Though the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia is well-known secret to most of the people who observe the region. But this was for the first time that a US president was able to fly directly from Israel to a Saudi airport. This was for the first time that the airspace is now open for the Israeli flights to pass. And this is also important that the two Egyptian islands, which has been now transferred to Saudi Arabia. So and with the permission of Israel. So you can see there is a groundwork which is laid down for the future move, a decisive move towards normalization. But I don't think it will happen so easily and so fast, primarily because Saudi Arabia's own, you can say, status in the region, its own politics, interest in the region. It has been particularly the senior Salman, who is the king, was the propounder of the Arab League decision not to normalize ties with Israel until there is a two-state solution. And until he is alive, I don't think Saudi Arabia legitimately will sign a deal and like UAE did, or Morocco did, or Sudan and Bahrain did. So Saudi Arabia may not sign Abraham Accord, but there will be steps, gradual move towards normalization. And if that was the objective, Biden has been quite successful in doing that. Yeah.
You mentioned the two-step solution, and Biden has said that his commitment to that solution also has not changed. But of course, on the ground, things show up differently. What are the expectations, if any, that Palestinian people have from all this?
Well, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, there are demonstrations going on. When he was there earlier in the day, there were demonstrations against his visit, primarily because you do not expect anything from Biden when it comes to Palestinian solution of the Palestinian state. If you see, when he was the vice president, Obama, during the Obama administration, basically his Obama administration was trying to revive the talks between Israel and Palestine, pushing Israel to do that, but they failed miserably. Primarily, if you see one incident, the moment Biden landed in Israel in 2010, Israelis declared thousands of new settlements home within the occupied territories. It means they never took Biden seriously, and they are not taking him seriously even now. Biden has also a very strong record of being pro-Israeli. So he will talk about Palestinians, he will try to create some balance. For example, this time he visited Mahmoud Abbas, he announced millions of dollars of aid to Palestine for Palestinian healthcare and all. But when it comes to taking any measure which will push Israel towards a solution, that is not going to happen. So he will talk about it. There will be a rhetorical commitment, but there will be no concrete action on the ground. This was reflected last year also when the Israelis were carrying bombing on Gaza for 11 days. He just asked politely his counterpart basically Israeli Prime Minister at that time, Benjamin Netanyahu, to cease the bombing. Netanyahu publicly kind of chided him. So that shows the relationship, a peculiar relationship between Biden and Israel. And given that context, and Palestinians are correct that they are not expecting anything from this visit, at least.
All right. Thanks very much, Abdul, for that update, which will probably bring our coverage of that visit also to a close. And with that, we bring our talk on this episode of Daily Debrief also to a close. From Abdul, myself, and everyone in the People's Dispatch team, thanks very much for watching. You can get more details, as always, on our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and also give us a follow for updates on whatever social media platform you use. We'll be back tomorrow for our last episode of the week. Until then, goodbye.